r/Askreddit by Redditors. Serious. People who have been clinically dead and came back. How was the other side like? When I was much younger, 12 years old, I died from a full cardiac arrest. This was at a high school football, American, game. I can only remember flashes of memories from a few hours before until 2 weeks after the incident. Riding in the back of our truck to the game, sitting in the stands with my mom, and how annoying the opposing team's chant was. Eagles, thump thump. Skyline, thump thump. Congrats Skyline in Salt Lake City, your chant was able to pierce the veil of death. I remember a lot of black which quickly enclosed like a shell into a tunnel. The tunnel itself was made of metal and looked exactly like the tunnel from Bespin where Luke ends up. I don't think my mind could comprehend what it was seeing, so it filled in the gaps as best it could. The feeling was awesome though. Unless you have seen it, there really are no words to describe it. I think this is because I cannot convey the emotions and feelings to you. They are very intense. I was dead with no heartbeat for a little over 4 minutes. This caused massive problems later with memory loss and other brain damage. My mother said I was literally crazy for about 2 weeks after this. I was constantly talking to the monk in the corner. That my cat was being tortured in the next room. That my mother had 3 eyes. I was a loon. On the bright side, I had a full-page article in both schools' yearbooks that year, so I got that going for me, which is nice. That insanity bit is worrisome. Did you recover from it, or do you still have hallucinations? I did get better. My sister was with me in the room, and she said my face went from the crazy/confused expression back to my normal self, and I asked her for some IDs. I started remembering stuff again after that. I have absolutely no memory of the 2 weeks I was out of it. I'm all good now for the most part. I have permanent short-term memory problems. Someone can ask me a question, I will literally have no memory of it 5 minutes later. I tend to carry a notebook with me to write stuff down as a reminder. So your memento. Sort of. I had large chunks of memory gone at first. I could not remember my friends. My best friend came in, and I didn't recognize him. It's what I tell people when they find out about the death part. Dying is easy, it is the coming back that is a putter. I posted this a long while back, so you may have read it before. What I remember is a vast nothingness. It's hard to describe, as we are always surrounded by something wherever we go. Suddenly in this vast nothing was a blinding pinprick of light that got larger. Either I was moving towards it, or it was moving towards me. As it got closer, what appeared to be a single light resolved into first one, then several, then millions upon millions of stars of all shapes, sizes, and colors, along with tons of nebulae. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. As I approached the center, it seemed like I was joining a universal consciousness, a being made up of the thoughts, emotions, and experience of everyone and everything that had ever lived. I'm sure it was all just a hallucination brought on by the trauma I had suffered the few days combined with my heart/breathing stopping, but there's a part of me that hopes that what I saw is what really happens when we die. Upvote because I hope this is what it's like. I know this will get buried, but whatever. I attempted suicide a few months ago. I was hanging myself in my garage. I get the rope ready, put on some music, stand on some cinder blocks, secure the rope around my neck. Then I send a few texts and kick down the cinder block tower. Pop. I'm dangling above the concrete floor. My first thought was what the duck am I doing? It then progressed into how do I get down? How do I get down? Faster and faster. Until I forgot how I got up there. I kept reaching for the ground. But I couldn't understand why it was so far away. My thoughts became more sparse. My vision began stuttering. Darker and darker, until the deepest blackness imaginable. Then it was just peace. I felt calmer than I ever had before. I felt happy. Like it was purely a blissful experience. After that came the light. It wasn't a solid white light, it was like headlights in heavy fog, driving fast right at me. I felt my stress and anxiety rushing back. Happiness drained from my body. I was awake, but it was like a dream. I slowly regained proper consciousness over the next few days, and I had the shakes extremely bad for the next week. My rope had snapped, and because of that I'm alive. Edit. Thank you everyone for your well wishes. I'm trying to reply to everyone, but that might take me a little while. Writing this out put me in a similar mindset to when it happened. Edit 2.0. I have received professional help in the past. But, every single time I try and get help, they try and stuff me full of pills. I'm not ever going to rely on medication to fix me. I would rather feel the way I do sometimes than be a zombie. I have tried the medication that they had prescribed for me, but it made me not me, if that makes sense. I was in a coma for a few days and died for 3 minutes. The coma itself was completely empty, no sense of time, no blackness, nothing. Every so often I would come to a little bit and saw brief hazy flashes of scenes of a visitor. They lived out of state at the time, so I was confused / happy to see them, but couldn't physically talk to them. Worst feeling ever. Then from the next thing I remember was the famous light. Too spooky, but not one light, 2 lights. They were circling around each other while getting bigger and bigger. They seemed almost as if they were trying to save me. Then I woke up in various different hospital rooms, ultimately being told, hey, you died for a bit and we are changing your catheter now. Not verbatim. Weird experience that I forget even happened most of the time. Relearned to walk in a day or 2. I still can feel the very distinct vibe if I think about it long enough. Almost like a happy nostalgia. TLDR, I no longer fear death, but am extremely grateful for life. Hey, you died for a bit. Oh, that's chill. I was 12 and very sick. I had a very high fever and remember going in the hospital and people visiting me and watching a lot of TV back when MTV and VH1 played music videos. Other than that I remember nothing. Years later my mom apparently told me the rest of the story, that my heart stopped and had to be defibrillated 2 times. No memories of it. The really weird part for me was that I don't have any memory of her telling me about the story. My wife told about the story my mother told me and it finally sunk in. It's strange how the brain can block things out. Edit. It sounds like defibrillated isn't the correct medical method. I'll just say here I was revived or resuscitated. I'm leaving it up top as that's how my mind filled in the gaps when I was later told about being told the story. I was on loads of morphine, so it's still really hazy and the fact it happened almost 6 years ago doesn't help the memory, but I'll try to recollect, as accurately I can, what happened and what I experienced. I had appendicitis and my foster parents at the time didn't take me to the hospital until 2, almost 3 days after it had burst. I should been dead well before they took me. Even the doctors called it a miracle. Well, I died while waiting for surgery. I had to wait for a pediatric surgeon to come in because no one else felt comfortable performing the surgery on a case this bad with a child this size. Dumbuses took me to the adult hospital, not the pediatrics, which was 40 minutes away. I was 14, 5 feet 3, and weighed 75 pounds soaking wet. So while I was waiting for the surgeon I was in a room with me, the doctor, my 2 foster parents and my grandmother who is an RN. Like I said, I was really drugged up and couldn't really focus on much and couldn't really do anything. The monitor I was hooked up to would beep really loudly from time to time and the intervals between beeps started to decrease rapidly. Turns out I wasn't breathing. I was conscious for the most part. I just kept forgetting to breathe. Doctors had to keep nudging me so I wouldn't sleep. I just remember being pissed at this loud beeping that kept me from enjoying a nice slumber. The doctor had to step out for a second and my grandmother assured him she could look after me for a second. Unfortunately for her, she was out of her mind with rage at my foster parents. She didn't hold anything back. My grandma is a sweet Mormon Newton without a rude bone in her body. Well, I heard quite a few duck yous, pieces of shit, etc. My point is she didn't notice I had passed out until the monitor signaled I had flatlined. This is the bit where I died, and is by far the most vivid part of the experience. I remember being capable of thought, but no thoughts were in my head. I can only describe it as being conscious of my spirit, but without a body for my thoughts to be processed in. I just kind of existed without feeling, thinking or being anything. I was floating. Honestly at the time it was a great feeling. I don't remember any visions of people, family, places or anything like that. But I felt something wrap around me and comfort me. Without talking I was assured I was okay, that there was nothing to be worried about, and at that point my thoughts returned. I knew at that moment, without knowing how long I'd be able to keep thinking, that I had to go back. I didn't want to, but knowing that the last thing I'd see before I left mortal life was these two pieces of human trash who had abused me, neglected me, and treated me like a stain that they didn't want to bother trying to clean up, that did it. I wanted to get back to my body, fix my ducking life, so I could go back and live with my biological parents and feel loved again. In that moment that's all I cared about. And then I sort of willed myself back. Doctors had tried to resuscitate me but had failed. Everyone was shocked when I opened my eyes and seeing the tears in my grandma's eyes after thinking she'd lost me. That did it. I fixed my life. I reinvented myself and threw out all my anger, depression, rage and everything else that put me in Brent and Karen's home. Honestly, the only anger I felt, the burning hatred kind that makes you want to do anything possible to release it, in the last 5-ish years, since I moved from their home is, when I think about them, and how they are still fostering youth in custody, and probably pulling the same shit with those kids. I live about an hour away from where they are now, and I have to restrain myself from driving up there, kidnapping those kids, and taking them to the authorities with an explanation of why. The only reason I haven't done that is because I've tried telling the authorities what kind of people they are. I guess the words of a juvenile duck up don't stack up against the lies from people who have practiced this shit for years. Anyways, sorry for the rant at the end. I know that wasn't entirely what you'd asked, but it felt good to type out. Thanks OP for asking this question. It's been surprisingly therapeutic talking about this. My mother came back from dying as they were signing her death certificate. Complications with the anesthesia during a C-section. On many occasions she has described the struggle she had as she laid there, able to feel everything but unable to move as they cut her open and took me out. During this she remembers losing the ability to breathe and panicking for a few moments before a realization that breathing wasn't really that important. She remembers looking down at her body and even told the doctors everything they were saying and doing to her as they tried to revive her. In her experience, coming back was a conscious choice. She felt like she could either leave or choose to stay and that it would be okay either way. Surrounded by love is something she says a lot. Obviously she decided that she had some rather pressing responsibilities to resume and came back, but she has always described the whole event to me to be a very warm / loving / reassuring thing. I'm late to this thread so no one will see this, but I've never told this story so here it goes. I died for a very short period due to a drug overdose. Before passing out all I remember is lying on my bathroom floor sweating profusely. That's when my roommate found me and called an ambulance. I had stopped breathing a few minutes before they arrived, then shortly after my heart stopped. Thankfully they were able to revive me. I don't remember anything about the dying part or the hospital stay. It's what happened when I got home that I remember well, because it freaked me the hell out. You see, a few weeks prior I had burned a quarter-size hole in my couch armrest with my cigarette while playing video games, but now the hole was gone like it never happened. The night I originally burned it, I had a few friends over, and we did our best to make the burn hole as least noticeable as possible, but there's only so much you can do. I lived with the hole for weeks, picking at every time I sat in that spot. Anyways, when I first noticed it was gone I thought I was having a psychiatric breakdown. Did someone come in and switch out my couch? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I know it's such a small inconsequential thing, but it's such a strange feeling to be so sure of something happening, and yet there ain't no proof it ever existed. So I asked all my friends if they remembered, and of course no one did, so I moved on, though always thinking about how strange that was. About 2 or so weeks later I was sitting in the same spot playing video games while smoking a cigarette, and wouldn't you know it, I burned a hole in the exact same spot as I'd remembered from before. Needless to say I was more than little freaked out by this. Unfortunately for me this one has yet to disappear. Edit. Thank you all for the supportive replies and messages. My story is extreme, but unfortunately not uncommon today. Addiction is a disease that does not discriminate. It affects people young and old, poor and rich, from all walks of life, all over the world. It is currently an epidemic. If you or someone you know is struggling with alcohol and or other drugs, please reach out and ask for help. Recovery is possible, but not in isolation. I have personally had success with therapy, residential rehab, intensive outpatient, support groups, and AA. If you are overwhelmed and need help with a starting point, please message me. Also thank you for my first ever gold from you /beep bloop bloop. I stopped breathing in my mother's minivan. She swerved into the fire station of my little hometown we were thankfully right next to. I still can't believe the luck of that. If we had been on the highway I would probably be dead. She's trained in CPR and pulled me out of the car, she says, frantically pumping my chest and yelling like a maniac until the firefighters took over. She brought them cookies every week for a year after that. Anyway, on my side there was nothing. I remember being in the car. I was only dead a minute or so at most. But all of that, and the coma that follows, was a heavy sense of crushing nothingness. I remember coming out of the coma vaguely. I knew my sister was there at one point. She never ever visits us, and I hadn't seen her in years. I remember hearing her voice, but I was all connected to tubes. I knew it was life or death serious if she showed up. There was a respirator and a feeding tube and a catheter and several IVs. Also all 4 limbs were strapped down. I guess when people wake up from comas it's a natural reaction to yank out their tubes, which can complicate shit. So they restrain you. I was mostly out of it, but in that day I was waking up I remember feeling immense shame and fear. This was all my fault because I'm an alcoholic and I had been going this way for a while. It was just supposed to be a quiet relapse that no one would know about. Well, now everyone knew. Anyway, the minute or so I was dead I do not remember. I didn't have any spiritual experience. Unfortunately, I had always been curious about this. I didn't overdose on purpose, but I had fantasized about finding out what was on the other side without fully committing to it. The reality of that was of course terrifying. Being strapped down, and 6 doctors or nurses telling you not to breathe while they pull out that giant bulky machine that's been pumping your lungs for you for days. It was instinct. I took a breath. I aspirated on my own vomit and got a lung infection. I couldn't speak or yell, and I heard them closing the curtains and telling my mom to leave the room. I heard them mention sepsis. I know that's very bad. I heard them mention my fever spiking. I could not accept the fact that I might die soon, and I could not say anything to my family, who were right behind that curtain. They pumped me full of propofol, Michael Jackson's fatal drug, and put me back on the respirator. Later I woke up for good. Only mom was there. I wanted to tell her how sorry I was, how upset I was that this all happened, that I caused so much chaos again. I had broken her, and I knew I could not repair her at all. But I was on oxygen and my lungs weren't strong enough to say anything but small squeaks here and there. She was so relieved. But as soon as she knew I'd be okay she was livid. I deserve that. But I knew things would never be the same. My family hardly speaks to me anymore. But I'm 16 months sober. So there's that. Overall, dying, reviving, coma, sepsis 0/10 do not recommend. In rehab they told me God saved me. Hey, maybe, but I didn't see any God. My mom saved my life by swerving into that fire station and doing CPR on her drunk ass loser daughter. I don't think many people would be able to do that. I don't know that I would be strong enough to do that. I did not have a spiritual experience, but I did realize there are some extraordinary people looking after me. I was 22 at the time, and I had only started drinking at 19. For perspective, I have 4 alcoholic grandparents and an alcoholic dad. I believe that genetics plus my already shaky mental health / upbringing plus my own selfish behaviors led to such a rapid descent. A friend of mine described death. She was technically dead twice, as being surrounded by darkness and floating with some sort of warm gel-like substance covering her. She never wanted to leave that state. Oh my GPD, that literally described the tanks that the machines used in the Matrix. Oh duck. Heavy breathing. And now I know Kung Fu. Whoa. Not mine, but the head of my program was in a horrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes on the scene, while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she's ever experienced. It was blank black nothing, but that was perfectly fine, and she felt a comfort she can't even explain. She remembers being angry at the man working on her when she finally came back to her body because she wanted to stay there. She told us she can't wait to experience it again when it's really her turn. Edit. I'm really pleased this resonated so strongly with so many of you. I wanted to add some detail about her. She's not religious in the slightest, and she actively quashes our ghost stories and shit. Mortuary students, because she only believes in tangible things, so she fully turned me into a believer. Felt it's important I make a distinction. She was very adamant about when telling us this story she's not advocating suicide. She stressed that she isn't telling us she's trying to reach this place again, but that when it was her time she was going to be comfortable embracing it. She told us she can't wait to experience it again, when it's really her turn. This was honestly very comforting in a weird and unexpected way.